Yo, Colin, it's Che. Just wanted to say thank you for the episode talking about the war game you're playing. Thank you so much for talking about it. It got me really excited about maybe digging out my War Master stuff and looking at this set of rules, because I love that scale, and you just kind of reminded me that I have all that stuff. So just want to say thanks, because sometimes just someone out there having this little inspiration reminds me, sort of talking about something they're enjoying, reminds me of something that, I haven't done for a very, very long while. And as a war gamer, it was just lovely to be reminded of that and to feel the enthusiasm that you had. So game on, man. Game on.
Hello, I'm Colin Green, and you are listening to Spikepit. Yeah, the wargaming is back underway. I'm super enthusiastic about it, and it's funny how the smallest little change can have a big effect on some of the stuff you're doing. I talked about Dragon Rampant, and it's not actually a new game. It's been out for quite a while, I think. It's one of the earlier releases in the Osprey Wargame series. It's got me reaching for the paints. I've broke out the paints. I've been rebasing miniatures, getting my forces together, like I said. And funnily enough, went up into the loft. And as Che mentioned, War Master was on my mind. I've got a painted undead War Master force, which, in case you're a listener and you're not aware, it's an old game that Games Workshop put out, well, back in the 90s, late 90s perhaps. Can't recall. Might have been a bit later than that. But I really liked it, and funnily enough, some of the stuff going on in Dragon Rampant puts me in mind of War Master. The way you have activations, in particular, if you fail with those activations, you get a turnover and play passes to your opponent. I always liked that, thought it was interesting, and it's proving to be a little bit of a source of consternation for Sonny. I think when he tries to do something a little bit tricky. He's got a shaman in his arm, and he loves to cast this pretty powerful lightning bolt thing. It's a ranged attack that hits on a 4, which is really good. Most archers need a 5 at 12 inches and a 6 from 12 to 18 inches, whereas this is 4s and 5s. It doesn't sound a lot, but if you've got an archer's unit in a duel with the shaman, you haven't got to be a mathematician to work out who's likely to win that. So I tend to put a bit of pressure on his shaman with this nasty spell. It's like having a pretty good piece of artillery nuking all my units. So I tend to try and take it out. And of course, once I start closing in on him, pressuring that unit, he's trying to shoot that off. And sometimes he doesn't think about his priorities. So the whole activation thing works. You roll in 2 dice, and you need to perhaps get a 4 or a 5 on 2 dice for a lot of your units to move them. Normally a 5. Some units are not so responsive, they need a 6, but I haven't seen it much worse than that. However, he's trying to roll 7s to get this spell off, and that's a very different proposition. But yeah, it's been fun. So I've windowed out a little bit. I've derailed myself. So I went up into the loft for the very purpose of digging out a War Master Orcs and Goblins army, because I talked about the flexibility for like the miniatures that you can use, and I think it'd be a pretty easy crossover to War Master. What you'd need to do is they come on little, I think 40mm by 20mm bases with a couple of strips of figures on each base, and I would use 2 of them and track damage with a D6 for each unit, so a little D6 by the side of the unit, and then, or when you get down to half strength for a unit, you take off one of those bases, so immediately you get some impression of what's going on. I like the system for the reason that you've got this flexibility, and there's that little bit of tinkering that I've got accustomed to with RPGs. This led me on to thinking about ways that maybe I could make the dice work a little bit better for me. The first thing I did was, when we initially played, we just scrabbled together 12d6 and we were kind of handing them backwards and forwards across the table, and it devolved into a bit of dice anarchy really, and we lost time just counting dice and farting about. Pretty soon you realise that, well, we both need a set of dice. You're better off using some kind of colour coding, so we had red team and blue team, so 12 red d6, 12 blue d6, little things like that just kind of come about through play. I don't think you necessarily would have picked up something like that on a initial read through. I know I certainly didn't. Then you've got the old chestnut of, well, maybe we use dice cups, which is a bit of a wargamer thing, a wargaming club thing. In my experience, I've found that to be the case. Quite a good way to corral your dice. So really, you just store them in the dice cup, invert the cup when you want to make a roll, gather them back in, and it speeds up play. You can kind of make dice rolls in advance. Just shake up the cup, invert it, leave it covered, and then when you need a dice roll, you reveal the dice. I don't know. There's just these little things fascinate me, and I think it applies to other games. I think, you know, your online play, you're looking for ways to make that smoother. Then there's how if you're writing RPGs and you're writing material, you're looking at ways to make it work better for the people trying to run an adventure or play a system. It's this, is it optimization, I guess? It's an interesting topic, I think. It puts me in mind of this idea that Games Workshop were always promoting the wider hobby. So it wasn't just about playing war games. Really, it was about modelling the terrain, building your army list, and kind of optimising your army list. And each time you played, a bit like in something like Magic the Gathering, you might go away and you're constantly tinkering with your deck, trying to improve it. And it was just the same for us as kids with Warhammer Fantasy Battle. You know, you'd have this sort of spiral bound notepad with loads of scribblings, writing out different army lists, calculating the points cost, shaving points off here and there to see if you could get something else. And you maybe would have a stable of different units, and then if you knew you were going to be fighting a battle against dwarves, you'd have one army list, and then you'd have your army list optimised for fighting dark elves. And you know, this was all kind of part of the wider hobby, that kind of lonely fun idea. And painting your minis was one of the things I spent a lot of time on. And yeah, it's that tactile, visual spectacle, I feel, that draws me to the miniature gaming sometime. And I parcel it away from my RPG. So this is why I'm not worried about minis in my RPGs, because really, and I've definitely said this before, but that's where the skirmish war games and that's where the skirmish games and the war games come in for me. But they are super time consuming, and I thought RPGs were time consuming, but if you've got to do all this stuff just to get to the table, yeah, that's pretty tricky. Of course, in my later years I realised you could have just played these war games with post-it notes or index cards. Write your unit on an index card and away you go. You could certainly do that for Dragon Rampant if you've got no miniatures and you kind of wanted to try out a game. In fact, when I initially played War Master, I went to the effort of making a Chaos Army out of little bits of cardboard, labelled up all the different units, and kind of almost used it as a way to construct armies. I'd sit there shuffling these little bits of cardboard, laying them out on the table in front of me, looking at formations and points costs, and don't think I ever actually used them in anger. Ended up with miniatures, built up and painted the undead, played with them, and I never really even played War Master that many times. I feel like Arfed got a few more games in than me, and then we moved on to something else. I still got the rules. I'll have to dig it up. I'll have to dig it up and perhaps let you know how I get on. For anybody who's stuck around this far into the episode and is wondering, well, what has this Dragon Rampant got to do with an RPG podcast? And whilst I do talk about different things sometimes, on this occasion there is in fact a link. Quite often I don't always understand the link when I start talking about something, but as I'm reflecting on it, revisiting a topic I've talked about, which is this blending of war games and bringing some war game elements into your RPGs. It's not a new thing. It's not something I've done much of, but I actually think that Dragon Rampant might be a nice solution for those folk that maybe want to fight a larger action in their games. So it'd be kind of tactical, unit scale, not a grand strategy thing, and not really massive armies. I think it might be quite a good way to perhaps do a raid on a village. The group of characters could just about function with maybe a few hirelings. They would, at this kind of Dragon Rampant or the typical Dragon Rampant scale, they would probably work as a unit, and then you've got flexible in-game designations for the other NPCs and types of units that might crop up, and they're pretty generic. You've got all your kind of humanoids covered, really. Organised humanoid armies are quite easily modelled by Dragon Rampant, and it plays out in perhaps an hour and a half. I thought also that you could, rather than play it as a actual tabletop war game using miniatures, you could quite easily put the game onto a grid, maybe a hex grid or a square grid. The grid could maybe be each hex or square represent 3 inches or 1 inch possibly in game terms, and I think you'd be good to go. You could just use little tokens. You could play it on some kind of whiteboard with a grid and play online quite simply. Might not look very pretty, or you could spend some time messing with it a little bit more, but I think there's potential there. So just in closing, might be something I take a look at, although there's quite possibly better ways of doing it, but I thought I'd just throw that in there because I thought folk might be interested.
As far as miniatures, it's great to hear you talk about miniatures. I gotta admit, aesthetics be damned, I am a square base kind of guy. I just think square bases tend to work easier. For a game like you're talking about with, run with what you brung, kind of, whatever the miniature looks like is what it is. I kind of like Song of Blades and Heroes by Ganesha Games. Really super duper simple game. It uses measuring sticks. There's 3 different measuring sticks you use for distances. You can make them out of like pipe cleaners or something simple, but it works really well. There's some other games I like too. That's my simplest as far as an entry-level game, what I like to introduce people. And they've got a ton of rule sets, everything from Ghostbusters to modern, to the base set is fantasy to, mutant, basically Gamma World, like post-apocalyptic mutants, you name it, they've got it. And yeah, so I think Ganesha Games does a really good job there for a basic, simple war game you can run with any kind of figures.
Yo, what up, Colin? Awesome episode, man. That's dope that you're, playing miniature games again with your kid. Again, like I've said before, I'll say it again. I wish my dad would have paid kind of any interest into the shit I was into other than football, which the only reason I was into playing football was because of him. But, yeah, as far as Games Workshop goes, one of my favorite YouTube dudes, Jim Murphy, been playing D&D since it came out. He's an old gray-haired. He talked about it, and he talked to one of those guys at Games Workshop back in the day, and they basically told him, because he was, when he talked to him, he was probably in his 20s or 30s or whatever, and they told him, yeah, our business model isn't for you. It's for kids to spend their money. We don't care about you. So, take that for what it's worth, man.
This episode's a bit of a strange beast. I didn't really know, if I'm honest, which way it was going to go. Would it be drive-by? Would it be into the pit? Don't suppose it really matters at the end of the day. Want to say thanks to the callers there. You heard from Che Webster of Roleplay Rescue, Jason Connerley of Nerds RPG, Variety Cast, and of course the unmistakable Joe Richter, Hindsightless. All talking about wargaming in one way or another to a greater or lesser degree. And yeah, I am enthusiastic. I'm happy that you've recognised that, Che, and it's awesome to hear from folks that have took a little bit of inspiration, and I think as a podcaster that's all you can do really. Try and be enthusiastic, try and be sincere, and hopefully some of that will rub off on others. Trying to be positive and not get dragged down by all the negatives that are going on out there. Jason, nice suggestion, thanks for that. I'll check it out, and I know you're a big wargamer yourself, and perhaps we will catch up one day on some sort of tabletop simulator or something like that. And Joe, yeah man, I try my best. I take being a dad very seriously, and yeah, my dad did his best. He got strangely into some of my hobbies as a kid in areas I wouldn't have expected him to. Like your dad, it seems. My dad was a sporty sort of person, and that the team sports was not so much a thing for me. I was more into the outdoor pursuits, and we shared an interest in skiing and the outdoors to a certain extent. But he surprisingly took to figure miniature painting and modelling, and gets involved in board games. So we've actually got a reasonable bit in common. But he's really budskies with my son Luca. They've got a big common interest in golf, and it's nice to see my dad getting involved with the kids as well. But I think at times like we're experiencing at the moment, family is more important than ever. And that, as they say, is a wrap. Thanks to everybody who called in, making this Into the Pit episode possible. Massive thanks to the pit crew, my patrons over on Spikepit Patreon. And last but not least, a big thanks goes out to you, the listener, for taking a bit of time out of your day to listen to old Spikepit. Take care, and I'll catch you later.